Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Everything Cloud series. I'm Lipika here from India, working as a marketing manager with Axiom. Axiom is a cloud service provider and a digital transformation partner. We at Axiom have been helping companies harness the power of the cloud. So today in our session, we have Mirko Ross, the CEO of Aswin.io. Mirko would be answering some interesting questions on supply chain, basically cybersecurity in supply chain. So before we get into the question and answer session, Mirko, could we have your introduction?
Yes, first of all, thanks for having me in your show. My name is Mirko Ross. I'm one of the co-founder of Ashwin. We are a company located in Stuttgart in Germany, and it's our mission and vision to improve the cybersecurity in software supply chains.
Thank you so much, Mirko. So recently, we have been hearing a lot about cyber attacks happening in supply chain. So could you explain why is cybersecurity so important in supply chain today?
Well, cybersecurity in supply chains are not a new topic. I mean, they have really started as well with when we were building the first complex software. However, it has become a more popular topic the past 2 years. Some of you maybe have in mind SolarWinds Orion, which was a very broad software supply chain attack, and recently we have seen Log4j. And both attacks are showing that the industry is super vulnerable, the software industry. Both are showing that the software industry is super vulnerable because you have maybe a small software component or a small software supplier which has a lot of connections inside the software supply chain. Let's say he's contributing a library, and this popular library is then just included on many other products and many other vendors, and by that the attackers can reach amplification. So they have a much bigger impact if they just inject malicious code, for example, on one small vendor, and then it will be used by many other companies in the world inside their products.
All right. So as you mentioned about code, right? So like 2021, we heard about attacks happening at supply chain, and this was mostly related to the supplier's code, right? So what is it right now? Is it the same this year as well, or is it something new coming up?
No, I think there are multiple things which are happening. First of all, one very promising attack is, of course, that you are breaching the system of one supplier, which is, for example, a very well-connected, very important suppliers in a software supply chain. Let's, for example, think about a company who's doing update management. If you breach them, of course, you can inject your own malicious code and distribute it then to many other companies. I think that's still a very popular way how this type of attacks are carried out in practice. The another one is, of course, related to open source projects, so that attackers having a look on very popular open source projects. And there are many of them which are quite important, like, for example, for encryption, where I know that only a small group of people is really working on that project, and maybe the quality management teams are as well very small. So they are trying, for example, then to inject backdoors or bugs or vulnerabilities into the specific projects as a contributor by having the idea that the quality management team will not discover it. And then it's as well taken over. I mean, you have two other big projects, and maybe this quality management team is as well has a problem to detect the vulnerability. And another thing, what we see is, of course, with everything which is going on with frameworks, where developers are including frameworks, and then we see sometimes that the attackers manage that you can introduce an untrusted source into a framework. And then this is maybe a problem of the developer itself, that they are using parts of the frameworks or downloading the frameworks or referring in their frameworks to sources which are not trusted.
Okay, that's interesting. So, like as you mentioned about the encryption part, right? So, is it like till the stuffs reach the customers, or is it before as the process starts, and then you have that ability to actually, have your attacks being done. So how does it happen actually?
Well, there are different ways, of course, how it happens. One most common ways that you can inject an exploit into a source code database, or you can refer to a malicious source. And by that, these sources or the refers to sources are taking over in the projects of the customers, and then they have the vulnerability or the malicious code inside their own application. That's one way. Usually, how do you prevent it? You try to monitor and to scan your own source database if there are any known malicious code elements in there, or malicious referers. That's one way.
Okay.
Another way is that there are known vulnerabilities, zero-day exploits getting published from popular software. And this is not only regarding to open source software, but there's a vulnerability inside a software which is used by your own stack. And this could be, for example, as well, an encryption library, where we have seen in the past that encryption libraries have been weakened by nation-state actors for purpose. And then you have this weakened encryption method inside your own products, and by that there is a backdoor in there, which is a supply chain attack.
Oh, okay. That's actually very new to me, and thank you so much for sharing these insights, interesting ones. So, as we have gone through what are the cyber attacks that could take place in supply chain, so could you share with us some best practices in cybersecurity when it comes to supply chain risk management?
Well, for many companies, it starts, for example, that they have a clear overview on the software bill of material of their own products. So if you have an updated software bill of material, you know what kind of software products from which vendors are in your own product. And by that, you can do a lot towards risk management and risk monitoring. For example, continuous checks of the code base you're using with known vulnerabilities or published vulnerabilities. And this you can do on an automated base. And you can connect it as well, like to your GitHub or your Bitbucket systems or whatever you're using in the DevOps cycle. So if it works very well, I think you can implement the risk monitoring and risk mitigation processes into your agile project development. And that's, to me, best practice.
Okay, that's great. So, like as you have mentioned this, so can you give us some tips, like for organizations, how they can manage the risk of cyber attacks happening, supply chain organizations specifically?
Yeah, we see two things. First of all, it's of course when you are a software supplier and vendor for the larger enterprises or for specific industries, of course, you are forced to implement cybersecurity standards and to keep them, like having the right certification and audit processes in behind. That's an important step, but audit is only related, or the audit results are only valid in the time you have run the audit. So it's always a question like, what happens between two audits? And when we see regarding the attacks and what happened in reality is that many companies have proper audit results, but they were failing in execution. And this was often a management failure. So what you should do as a management is keep in mind that you implement the right procedures for cybersecurity, that you live the right procedures, that you have installed the right cyber risk management plans, and that your team is trained and as well your management is trained. So beside what we can provide on a technical level, which is always good, and an audit level, this is all about practice and execution from top to down in the organizations.
So it could be some regulations, right? I mean, when we talk about some tips for the organizations, then we can even like have some regulations that are being now considered when we talk about supply chain and cybersecurity?
There is coming regulation in place for many industries now. First of all, have a look, for example, for the automotive industry. I mean, a car, a connected vehicle, and an autonomous driving vehicle is a super complex product with many suppliers and software suppliers in place. And autonomous vehicles and connected cars are always as well not only a question of cybersecurity, but as well a question of safety, a safety of passengers, pedestrians, other people in public spaces. So that's why the regulators are having a very close look on software supply chains in these industries, and they are forcing the OEMs and big suppliers towards implementing cybersecurity in the supply chain.
Okay, so here we spoke about organizations in common. So in logistics, how high is cybersecurity a priority when we talk about logistics with supply chain?
I think the problem is always when I was thinking about Log4j, what was happening with Log4j. There was a situation that a lot of companies, they have their documentation in place, they had maybe software bill of materials in place as well, but they were not trusting their own documentation. So it seems to be that there's a gap between what you have implemented from the standards and the processes and what is the trust on the information you have in your own organization. So what they have done for Log4j, for example, they were asking their suppliers manually, is there Log4j in your product? As these suppliers have as well their own suppliers, they were asking their suppliers. So we had times of upstream and downstream of information like, is there Log4j in your product? And downstream towards your supply chain. And then the response of upstream, which had been 5 days, a week. The longest I know was 8 weeks for a super complex product. On the other hand, the vulnerability had been used by cyber attackers within 12 hours after the first exploit. We have seen botnets trying to scan the web for Log4j servers and using the vulnerability. So there's definitely a logistic problem in the supply chain because it took too much time to get the information and gather the information about what kind of software we are using and are there any exploits in it. And we need to improve that because otherwise we will lose the race against any cyber attackers.
Okay, so a very last questions, like from all the questions, this has actually been a very important thing. When we talk about attacks, we talk about defense, we talk about strategies. So could you tell maybe a couple of strategies, how the leaders actually they can have cybersecurity fortified in their companies or in their work?
Well, I mean, cybersecurity in the supply chain is not so completely different to general cybersecurity. So if you take care on some, I think you need to take care on these 3 columns. Like one column is that everything what you do in your organization must be covered from top to down, because at the end it's always about resources, it's about money, it's about training people and so on. So you need a top-down approach inside your organization as well. For example, you need to train your procurement department. What are the rules of engagement with a software supplier? Is it only the price? Or are there any other cybersecurity related topics which needs to be covered for the rules of engagement to make an order? So this is one element. A second element, of course, it's always about business. That's the question about the price. And third, we have a lot of super technical stuff in place, which we can use, for example, to monitor our risks. And you should, of course, decide wisely where you are using which tools, for example, like to secure your own DevOps processes, increase the quality management on your DevOps processes to get rid of the most common problems you have by cybersecurity supply chain attacks.
Thank you so much, Mirko, for briefing us on the wonderful questions and to have shared the insights on cybersecurity and supply chain. So before I end the session, it's just 1.5 hours later, we have a clubhouse session on the same topic. And it's really going to be interesting because we are going to share the same with different kind of people, different audience at a different platform. And Clubhouse itself has been a very huge platform wherein people dive into a lot of rooms, and it's going to really be interesting. So it was a very wonderful session. Thank you, Mirko. And I hope our listeners would be able to get some insights from the session today. Till next, we have a lot of upcoming sessions on cloud computing topics. So stay tuned for that, and do connect with us on all the social media channels on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Insta. We are there. Thank you so much, and bye. Take care.
Yeah, thank you very much.